Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And I hope you're ready to listen to a fabulous story, because I've got one for you tonight. And so don't forget to go and get your special drink, whatever it is you enjoy drinking. And if it's something unusual, I'd love to hear about it. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, me and my wife Pearl moved to the Oregon coast after I retired, which was something I had planned years in advance. It was always on the cards. I just loved it in this part of the world. The ocean spoke to my heart from when I was a young boy. I'm not exactly sure what it was saying when the waves thundered ebulliently against the rocks, thrashing sprays of white bubbly foam against the sculptural contours of their hard, unyielding surfaces. But let's just say there was something mysteriously enchanting about the ocean that grabbed my attention, that whispered tenderly to the depths of my soul, that tugged at my heartstrings. It was in this soulful place that I knew I truly belonged, and in truth there was no other place in the entire world I'd rather be than right here on this ribbon of beach sand, staring out at the wide blue yonder. The wistful nostalgic memories of my days as a little boy would take me right back to the same familiar ribbon of beach sand that I knew so well, where I would toddle around happily with my bucket and spade, staring in awesome wonder at the great ocean expanse stretched out before me, aquamarine waters that were constantly moving, expressing their thoughts with the undulating waves that rolled tempestuously towards the shoreline, fizzing on the golden sand, as they mischievously tried to catch my feet out. I would thoroughly enjoy its icy discharge, always giggling when my feet had been caressed and caught out by the water, while my ears never failed to revel in the sound of the crashing water that was oddly reassuring, surprisingly comforting. Then there were the familiar sounds of the squawking seagulls that would hover in the blue sky, hungrily looking for some easy pickings, sometimes even food from our own picnics, which would be eagerly snatched away. I loved the feel of the sea sand as it tickled my toes, and how much the gusty wind blew against my face. The smell of the sea salt that lingered in the air fragrantly, that you could taste on your tongue. And most of all the beguiling sunsets and sunrises, when the sky was illuminated with an orange glaze that always took my breath away. How much I loved it all. I remember making fabulously huge castles in the sand with my bucket and spade, collecting shells on the beach, watching the fascinating sea creatures in the rock pool, of which there were many, but the starfish held my intrigue. I even told my grandmother that one day I would own her property. Well, her house, I mean. I remember her smiling at me warmly and asking me, "Why would you like to live here, little George?" I would look at her and shrug my shoulders and say, "Because this beach house is my home, and so is the beach, and the ocean. The ocean is also my home." My grandmother must have taken me at my word, as she left me the beach house in her will. She exclaimed that the Oregon beach house was mine. George told me as a little boy that this beach house was his home, so I took him at his word, she wrote in her will. When my grandmother died, I was living with my family in a small North American rural town, the name of which I would not care to mention for obvious reasons, where I was the town sheriff. So in the early years, my young family gravitated to my grandmother's beach house for holidays, and me and my wife Pearl decided that this was the quintessential place where we would retire when we were older. It was a no-brainer for us, as my wife was equally as enamoured with the beach house and the beach as I was. We knew we would invest money into creating the perfect holiday retreat that would one day become our permanent residence. So even as a young man, I looked forward to the day when I would retire in this place that I so considered to be my home. When my first daughter was born, I began to see the world through a slightly different lens, courtesy of the strange events that would soon follow. I had come from a staunchly religious background, but my daughter Julianne, when she was about 4 years old, would have the most graphic, haunting nightmares. We would wake up in the middle of the night to hear her shrieking. Suffice to say, even in the throes of sleep, she would be oscillating her arms like an angry octopus, as if trying to fight something off, as if she was being attacked or harmed by someone, but no one was ever there. Me and my wife would rush into her bedroom, trying to calm down her dreadful sobs. Sometimes she seemed inconsolable with grief, her eyes just filled with terror. My wife would rock her in her arms, stroking back the black curls from her face. "It's all right, it's all right," she'd whisper. "Nothing can hurt you now. Mummy's here. Mummy won't let anything bad happen to you." "But, Mummy, the bad men are killing my family. They won't stop. There's so much blood. It's everywhere." It was my turn to take my daughter into my arms, and I told her, "No one is being harmed, sweetheart. It's just a nightmare. Can't you see? We're all absolutely fine. Look, there's no blood on me. Mummy and Daddy are not hurt. As I keep telling you, it's just a dream. A bad dream. That's all it is. Dreams aren't real, sweetheart." "Not you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about my other mummy and my other daddy. The mummy and daddy I had before you. Before I came here." At this I was stunned, rather confounded, but I gave the matter no further thought, until one day me and my wife were grocery shopping in the supermarket. My 4-year-old was seated in the trolley, and when she saw an African-American man entering the shop, she was filled with dread, and hastily bounced out of the trolley and tottered out of the grocery shop as fast as she possibly could on her tiny little legs, dashing across a busy parking lot where someone nearly ran her over in her desperate attempts to get away. My daughter was crying sorrowful tears that were streaming down her face. She seemed terribly afraid. A woman pulled down her driver's side window and said to me, "Oh, Sheriff, I nearly ran over that poor little girl over there. She came out of nowhere like a bullet. The poor little thing looks quite spooked. I wish parents were more responsible with their kids and didn't let them go running around parking lots like this. It's so irresponsible, such dreadful parenting, if you ask me." The woman thought I'd come to rescue someone else's child, not realising it was my own child that I was rescuing from her nonsensical, irrational, rather questionable behaviour that I could not fathom. I was naturally rather furious with little Julianne for dashing out of the grocery store like that. She could have been killed if she hadn't been seen by that approaching car. I could not make sense of her outlandish behaviour. She had always been a particularly well-behaved child. "Why, Julianne, did you run into the parking lot? You know you're supposed to stay in the trolley with Mummy and Daddy. If you misbehave next time, you can't come shopping with us." "There was a chocolate man in the shop. I'm scared of the chocolate man." For a moment I thought my daughter was talking about chocolate figurines. You know, the ones you get wrapped up in colourful aluminium foils, like Father Christmas in chocolate. But I soon realised she was haunted by the African-American man who had entered the store. I couldn't understand why she'd reacted like this to a very gentle-looking, unassuming, nice man. As young children are not conscious about culture or race, are they? So it was rather peculiar. "It was a chocolate man that looked like him that killed my family in Zimbabwe," she suddenly piped. "The family I had before God sent me down to my new mummy and daddy." I was nonplussed. How could my daughter even know Zimbabwe existed? My little girl went on to tell me that she was a white 15-year-old girl living on a tobacco farm in Zimbabwe during Robert Mugabe's land seizures, when many white farms were being snatched away from the government. One day everyone in her family had been hacked to death on the farm by chocolate men whom had even violently killed her own family, their pets, along with her father's chocolate farmhands, who were very nice people, she told me, and had tried to protect the family, but they too had also been savagely slain. She remembered her previous life with such a poignant accuracy that I couldn't doubt what she was telling me. She was 4 years old and had absolutely no knowledge of African history. Neither did I, for that matter, Indeed, the continent of Africa only ever featured in my thoughts when I thought about lions and elephants. My daughter was even able to point out the president when I showed her some photographs on my computer. He was the new boss of Zimbabwe. A horrible man. My other daddy, the one before you, said his head was funny on the inside. I took that to mean that he was perhaps as mad as a hatter, and indeed from my research I did on the matter, many people seemed to think that this was the case, but you had to keep such thoughts clandestinely hidden, or heaven help you. My daddy went to see him because of the death threats he was getting. The man laughed at him, said that Africa belonged to the chocolate people, and that the white people needed to go back to England or to America as Africa was not their home and they weren't welcome there, she said. That many of the chocolate men had hated her family for being white. They liked to hurt us. It made them very happy, she told me, her eyes brimming with tears. Daddy, why did the chocolate men hate us for being white? I don't know, dear. Politics is very complicated, I told her. It's very silly to get upset about skin colour, because we're all the same underneath. But there are good and bad people in this world, and they might have white skin, olive skin or black. Do you understand that? It doesn't matter what colour their skin is. Some people are good, and some people are bad. My 4-year-old nodded as if she understood. But there were some nice chocolate people on the farm who worked for my daddy, but they were killed by the bad men. I could not believe my 4-year-old was spouting out all this stuff to me, like a water out of a whale's blowhole, so seamlessly, when in her daily life as a little 4-year-old girl, she never spoke like this with such an articulate grown-up reasoning. It was almost as if a faint glimmer of that 15-year-old girl had shown me her face for a brief moment in my 4-year-old child. It was as if she wanted her voice heard from beyond the life she may have once actually lived. There was blood everywhere, Daddy, on the floor, on the walls, everywhere. And the horrible men, after they hurt us, they danced around the house, singing happily, while they burnt it down. I was still alive, Daddy, when it burnt down, but I don't remember it actually hurting me. She told me that when the angel took her up to heaven, through the long dark tunnel with the pretty light at the end, that the angel said that the men who had hurt her family had a lot to learn, and that karma would soon strike them down. My little 4-year-old girl didn't know what karma meant. By the time my daughter was 6, she had no memory of her nightmare, nor of her life as a 15-year-old girl on an African tobacco farm. I do remember one day when she heard the news that Robert Mugabe was dead. My daughter couldn't understand why she was so pleased. It was like this unfathomable sense of relief came over her. Imagine hearing that some obscure leader from a distant, unfamiliar country had died, and you are reassured by the news, and yet you know nothing about that leader at all. It was like that. It even flummoxed her. Julianne was middle-aged at the time, with children of her own, but she said to me, I don't know why I'm so terribly pleased to hear this news. I don't even know this man. Maybe it's because he doesn't look like a very good person. But I knew beneath the layers of her reasoning lay a dormant, long-lost memory that had been tweaked. It seemed there were people all over Zimbabwe not too upset about the dictator's demise, while others were grieving his loss. I couldn't pass judgment one way or the other, as I knew nothing about African history, the president of Zimbabwe, or the land seizures of white-owned farms. But I did marvel surreptitiously, to myself that is, over a 4-year-old's vivid recall of a previous life she claimed to have lived that had ended so tragically on an African tobacco farm. Let's just say after my daughter's enigmatic behaviour as a 4-year-old girl, I had much more of an open mind towards things that you can't explain, like cryptid creatures and haunted houses. Let's just say I was less cynical than most. When your paradigm of the world has been so dramatically shifted as mine was after my daughter's claims of a previous life, of which I could find no fault or reason to actually doubt. Indeed, after my research in regards to the matter, I found stories of people who remembered past lives very vividly all over the world. Even a young woman who remembered her life in Egypt in a temple, who later on worked as an Egyptologist and pinpointed areas where they might find lost gardens and missing undiscovered tombs. Her findings to date had been astonishingly accurate, for it was her memory of her past life that had led archaeologists to these extraordinary finds and discoveries. They could not explain her knowledge unless her claims were true, and that she had lived in those ancient times, so there were many people open to the idea of reincarnation, while others insist that such a concept is completely impossible. Let's just say after my daughter's claims, I remain on the fence about it. You have to decide what resonates with your truth, I think. While I was sheriff in town, and when my children were both teenagers, I do have memories of peculiar events that left you wondering what the hell happened there. One sticks out in my mind more than the others. One day a woman called Mrs. Audrey Phillips called me at my home, complaining that she was being stalked by something. I went over to see the woman at her home, whom I knew well from church. She was on friendly terms with my wife Pearl, and they both went to the same book club together. By all accounts, she was not a woman given to nervous anxiety or wild enigmatic claims. But on this particular occasion, she was in a dreadful state. She claimed something was after her, and that she'd seen the most evil face staring at her through the window, that had grinned at her maliciously, glaring at her with glowing red eyes. My deputy sheriff, who was on duty that night, thought the woman was completely balmy, but I did not. I decided I would personally attend to the matter myself, given that my deputy sheriff was almost sniggering about the woman's preposterous allegations, as if it was all just a big joke. I knew better than to jump to wild conclusions like that. Mrs. Phillips lived in a remote farmhouse off the beaten track, but when her husband left the farm for a few days with their 2 dogs to go and visit his parents, she had decided to stay at home to take care of their chickens and their horses while he was away. She didn't want a farmhand to take care of her horses, as she always liked to be hands on deck in this regard. I arrived at the farmhouse at about 12 at night, driving down dirt tracks devoid of street lights, flying past indeterminate meadows, rugged outcrops, lakes, farmhouses and woodgroves, so all of their obscure, ambiguous details were obliterated by the uncongenial carpet of darkness that ravenously swallowed up the geographic details of the landscape, so that everything I passed looked like dense cardboard cutouts, without any definition, shade or tone. It didn't help that the moon herself seemed to have taken a rain check, for her dwindling light appeared to be suppressed by a thick foggy haze that seemed to hijack her light, and even the stars were like dusted diamonds upon which most of the light had lost its twinkling lustre. When I arrived at the property and drove down the smooth cement driveway, the lower floor of the double-storey house was completely bathed in light, as the lights were all left on throughout the house, as if the light offered the woman a measure of comfort, while all the outside lights were left on. I noticed all the curtains were fastidiously drawn, in all the rooms apart from the sliding doors in the living room area, as the living room curtains were being dry cleaned at the time, I was told later. The first thing I noticed was that there was a huge commotion going on, a very loud racket in the stables, as the horses were neighing and beating at their stables with their hooves, as if they were busting their guts to get out of their confinement. I have never heard or seen horses making such a kerfuffle before. It was complete pandemonium. If they carried on this way, I reasoned they could do themselves some serious physical damage or harm. I could see the curtains twitch as the nervous woman peered through a little crack as my police vehicle neared its approach. I parked close to her front door, switching off the engine, climbing out of my truck, slamming the door behind me. Mrs. Phillips burst through the front door like a cuckoo from a cuckoo clock and came racing towards me. She was wearing a dressing gown over her pyjamas and a pair of fluffy slippers on her feet. Her grey curly hair was tousled messily over her ashen face, while her cornflower blue eyes were filled with abject terror. She was clutching a rifle in wobbly hands that made me seriously doubt she was capable of shooting at anything. Let's just say her whole body was trembling violently. I've never seen anyone this fearful before, apart from my little daughter when she was 4 years old, experiencing those reoccurring nightmares. "I'm so glad you finally got here, Sheriff. Sorry to have called you at home, but your deputy sheriff was laughing at me when I called. He asked if I was drinking or if I was high on something. I don't drink, Sheriff. There's something out there, something dreadful. The horses are hysterical. Please, Sheriff, let them out before they destroy the stable block, or worse still, themselves. I can't go over there myself. Believe me, I tried, but Sheriff, I couldn't do it. Something is watching me, and whatever it is, it's very big and very evil. I'm so scared to even help my horses. Sheriff, I fear it's a demon. It was staring at me with bright red eyes at 8 foot off the ground. I know I must sound like a rambling madwoman, but Sheriff, I saw something. It seemed not of this world. I'm not given to a wild imagination, Sheriff. You can ask your wife about that. But there is something out there. Believe me, there is. Can't you feel it, Sheriff? The energy around here. It feels tainted by a grievous heaviness. I can feel the evil in my very soul. I told her to go into the house at once, and I'd check out the property for her, which is exactly what I did. It was a tenebrous, treacherous night, and I don't use the word treacherous lightly. There was something very evil about the night, a bodeful energy, a heavy, menacing, oppressive atmosphere that lingered over the entire property. Even the chickens, I noticed, were clustered together tightly in their coops, while the neurotic horses were in a terrible, frantic state. I'd never seen anything like it. I decided to let them out of their stables, and they bolted out of the stables, like rockets charging into space, racing towards one of the meadows, galloping as fast as they possibly could. They couldn't get away fast enough. I watched them as they disappeared to the edge of a field, where they clustered together so tightly like a bunch of grapes, and kept staring out towards the stable block, almost as if they could see something that I failed to see. In a trice, I felt a chill running down my spine. I knew something was up. Horses don't behave with such a clamorous affray unless there's something terribly, terribly wrong. They're highly intuitive creatures. I ambled around the farmhouse considering whether I should call for backup or not. Everything felt really off about this inauspicious, malevolent night, but that wasn't reason enough to call for reinforcements. But I was struck by how quiet everything was. It was so airily still, but in the sound of silence were the screams of soundless voices, beating hearts, trembling bodies that remained as unflinching as a frozen block of ice. In the subdued deadness of this night you could have heard a pin drop, as not even the crickets and frogs dared to call out. Even the distant calls and howls of the coyotes had been suspended, for everything sensed that beneath the hemorrhaging, gloomy darkness there lay concealed a predatory, menacing foe. I could sense something watching me. I could feel eyes burning into my back. I knew I wasn't alone. But when I turned around, nothing was there. It was so annoying knowing something was there, but not being able to see a damn thing. I don't recall ever feeling so frustrated. I had my revolver clasped in my hand, and was turning around every corner, with my fingers on the trigger. I was stumbling around awkwardly with my torch, everything veiled by a dense, foggy blackness, indicative of a night when even the moonlight had retracted her favour, while the stars' twinkling light had been ferried away on the wings of the mist. For a fleeting second, I see these blazing, vindictive red eyes staring at me, from 8 feet off the ground, and this thing, whatever it is, appears to be clandestinely hiding behind a tree. I then hear this discomposing growl that is beyond anything I can describe. It reverberated through my entire body, almost like an electric shock, whizzing right through me. I was so petrified that I hurried quickly back to Mrs. Phillips' house, my heart thundering violently in my chest, and my face as white as a sheet. But the moment I entered the house, I told myself firmly to get a grip. I couldn't let Mrs. Phillips see how shaken I was. I knew something was out there that was insanely evil. I could feel it in every fibre of my being, but I was not about to communicate my aroused trepidation to Mrs. Phillips. "Is everything all right, Sheriff?" "Everything's fine, Mrs. Phillips," I say, trying to appear nonchalant and calm, which wasn't easy to pull off, as I'm no great actor, I didn't want to scare the woman, who appeared to be barely holding it together, as I could see she was trembling, and even when she spoke to me, her teeth would chatter. I called for backup, telling the team I'd seen a suspicious shadow in the woodgrove on Mrs. Phillips' property, and I wanted to ensure she was safe, and that no one was prowling around. Yes, I need backup, that's right. No, it's no laughing matter. There is genuinely something or someone on this property. It was very shadowy, obscure, but I need it investigated just to be sure that Mrs. Phillips is absolutely safe. That's right. See you soon. So you did see a shadow, said Mrs. Phillips, eyeing me curiously, having eavesdropped on my conversation. You saw something, Sheriff, didn't you? Please tell me. Right now I think I'm going to lose my mind. Well, I just want your property to be thoroughly checked out, that's all, to make sure there's nothing here. I didn't under any circumstances want Mrs. Phillips to suspect that I myself was freaking out. I knew something was out there, but I couldn't fathom what it actually was, and sometimes it's best not to say a single word to avoid creating any panic. Oh, thank you, Sheriff. I can't tell you how much better that makes me feel. You can see it's so tense out there tonight. Something's not right. The horses have never been so discomposed before. And the chickens, they don't behave like that, all cooped up together like that. I always think animals are intuitive, Sheriff. They know when something's not right. You make yourself nice and comfortable, Sheriff. I'll bring you a coffee. It steadies my nerves to keep myself busy. That's not necessary, Mrs. Phillips. It's very kind of you to offer, but I'll be just fine. I'd rather busy myself, Sheriff, making you coffee if I may. The memory of that haunting face staring at me through the window. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. Look at me, Sheriff. My arms are shaking like a leaf. I could swear, Sheriff, that was the face of the devil I saw. He was there one moment, gone the next. And I swear he was mocking me, almost as if he enjoyed scaring me half to death. Well, that would be very kind of you, Mrs. Phillips, then. Come to think of it, a coffee might be just what I need. Cream and sugar? Cream and 1 sugar. Yes, thank you very much. I was standing in the living room, champing at the bit, as I waited for my backup to arrive. I almost felt silly about calling for backup, but something was out there, and it wasn't giving me a good feeling. I felt as if everything on this property was in danger. I was brooding over the red eyes I'd seen. I was thinking about who or what they could possibly belong to. I was standing there in the only room in the house where there are no curtains to cover the glass sliding doors, although the outside light was on, so you could see the turf in the backyard very clearly. That's when I hear something knocking at the glass pane of the sliding door. I look up in horror to see this thing staring in at me. I nearly freak out, for I can see this creature so vividly, and he was made of the substance of your darkest, most discomposing nightmares. I can feel the most ghastly chill dashing down my spine, as my body stings with a pronounced trepidation. The creature is the most hideous, gruesome thing that I have ever beheld. He's about 8 foot tall, with the head of a wolf and the body of a man, standing up on 2 feet, with a thicket of dense, short hair, the colour of black coal. His eyes are like blazing red traffic lights, and his canine teeth are smirking at me. Worse still, he has 2 rows of these teeth. The creature is actually grinning, as if he's getting off on tormenting me, and this gobbly thick goo was actually dribbling out of his mouth. The creature was there for a second, and then gone the next, and I knew better than to tell Mrs. Phillips what I'd seen. Of course, when we did a thorough police search over the property, we found absolutely nothing. Isn't that so typical? But I always got a sense that the wolf-like monster was laughing at us in the dark shadows, watching us from somewhere. Suffice to say, the curious, ambiguous creature was never ever seen again on Mrs. Phillips' property. But I am certain that this idiosyncratic wolf-like humanoid was having a blast, scaring us to death. And to this day, I believe this was unequivocally the case. But I will say this, all the police on that search exclaimed they could feel the most dreadful evil, the likes of such they had never experienced before, that was as pronounced to them as an obnoxious vile smell would be. Of course, in my line of work, I'd heard all kinds of stories of cryptid creatures and unusual sightings, but the wolf-like humanoid that I encountered was not something I'd ever forget in a hurry. Let's just say when I retired from my job as sheriff in a small town, I seriously thought I'd left behind all the chaos and disarray of the strange, enigmatic peculiarities that had sometimes crossed my path, but I couldn't have been more wrong about that. When me and my wife Pearl moved into my grandmother's beach house, we settled into our new abode so seamlessly. It felt like this intriguing part of the world was where we naturally belonged. I knew that the ocean had always spoken to my heart. The beach house was nestled on top of a high hill, like a sparkling white jewel, with floor-to-ceiling glass sliding doors that opened up onto large patios, giving you spectacular panoramic views of the coastline from miles around. There were other beach properties further along the way, but as we were the last property on this stretch of coastline, which ended up in a quintessential cul-de-sac, it felt very private in our location, where you could observe jutting rocks rearing their obtrusive but sculptural heads through the surf like ginormous sea creatures. There were a collection of rocks on the furthest end of the cul-de-sac, where you would observe the most marvellous rock pools bursting with abundant sea life. My favourite spot to observe the starfish when I was a little boy. My late grandmother's property was fringed by an abundance of trees on every side, so it boasted privacy in every regard. When we moved into our house, I always got a sense when we were out and about, walking across the beach, that we weren't alone. It wasn't a menacing feeling, but it definitely felt that something or someone was watching us. On one occasion I discovered these huge footprints on the side of our house that couldn't have been made by a human being. They were so huge, with a slightly splayed right toe, that suggested this individual had never worn shoes a day in their life. A Bigfoot, I wondered to myself. Surely not. I thought it might explain the feeling of being watched all the time, and account for the size of the large footprints, but I never gave the matter any further thought. I began to realise that shortly after moving to our new home, I was being followed whenever I left my property by a white Honda truck that conveniently didn't have a registration number to check out. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, but this white Honda truck kept appearing in my rear-view mirror. One day my wife spotted a man in town when she was shopping, claiming to be an old friend of mine. "I knew I recognised you," the man had told her. "You are the sheriff's wife. Fancy spotting you here by the Oregon coast." "Me and my husband have retired," she told him. "He's around here somewhere. I'm sure he'd love to see you. He just slipped off for a moment. My husband knows so many people. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but what did you say your name was?" The man indicated to his cell phone and quickly answered it. He nodded at my wife and, mimicking with his hand gestures that he needed to take the call, he was gone, and she never saw him again. "I wonder who he was," she said to me. "Such a nice man. Had to rush off in a terrible hurry. I didn't get his name, but he recognised me as your wife and spoke very highly of you when you were town sheriff. Such a small world," she mused. One weekend, my wife had gone away to stay for a few days with her sister who lives in Florida, so I was left at the beach house all on my own for a couple of days. With my wife away, I thought it would be a great opportunity to get some much-needed things done. So I spent my time fixing a couple of kitchen cabinets in the kitchen and some drawers that needed brand new hinges. I decided to repaint one of the bedrooms in a very attractive off-cream colour. By the end of a long, exhausting day, after having worked very hard, I sat down to watch some ice hockey on the box, and then finally retired to bed. It was late in the night, and I was awoken to some strange banging noises. The only way I can describe the noise is it sounded as if a metal bar was being banged against the drain pipes of the house. The noise was terribly loud. Was someone out there? I wondered. Then I heard the loud thumping sound of someone banging the front door. I was tired, burnt out, exhausted from the previous day, my eyes drenched with sleep, my body subdued from its natural desire to investigate the unexplainable. But the inbuilt policeman inside me, that needs to find answers, reluctantly drags me out of bed. It's almost as if someone has thrown ice-cold water over my face, as I bounce from being consumed by exhaustion to a hyper-alert state. What the hell was going on? I hurriedly put on my dressing gown and slippers and quickly dashed towards the entrance hall to open the front door. I look through the peephole and see no one standing there. How odd. I'd heard someone pounding the door. I know I did. I pull back the chain and open the door cautiously, but no one is standing there. It's tenebrous, but there are soft prisms of moonlight dancing through the sky, casting their delicate shadows across the yard. I can detect the vertical silhouettes of the statuesque imposing trees with their velvety needled boughs jiggling against a slight blustering wind that is nudging my face with a cool whisper of fresh air. I can hear the tumultuous sounds of the feisty ocean waves crashing tenaciously against the rocks and smell the sweet fragrant salt in the air, laced with an infusion of pine. With my torch in my hand, along with my revolver, I edge around the house, my torch scanning the immediate area, but once again, I see absolutely nothing. That's when I hear the banging sound again, but this time it's coming from the ribbon of beach, a similar sound to what I'd just heard earlier, around the house, only it's slightly further away. The sheriff in me guides me to the beach. I want to find out the origins of this peculiar, enigmatic noise. I sense something feels off, but I want to get to the bottom of this mystery. What is that sound? I cannot see much as I venture onto the beach, pulling my slippers off as it's not easy to walk on the soft sand in your shoes. The sand feels soft to the touch, but cool beneath my feet, and the sound of the ocean is significantly louder as I'm now closer to the sea. I flash my torch up and down the long ribbon of beach, and everything is remarkably quiet, beyond the rambunctious whipping sounds of the waves and the punnelling breeze. In a trice, something pushes me forcefully down onto the sea sand, and I fall backwards, losing my footing. My revolver has been tossed away from my reach, while my lighted torch lies yards away from me on the sand, its light offering me good visibility. I'm staring into the blazing blue eyes of a man whom is filled with an intense hatred. So much so, he's almost spitting in my face. The man is huge, beefy, very powerful, a hell of a lot stronger than I am. "Hello, Sheriff!" he screams at me above the sounds of the ocean waves so I can actually hear him. "Do you remember me? Because I most certainly remember you, Sheriff. I've been waiting for this cosy tete-a-tete for a rather long time, I'll have you know. And finally we meet. I got to meet your delightful wife a few weeks back. Lovely lady she was. I made sure she was away before I sprung my little surprise on you. Wouldn't want the little old dear to get in the way, would we, of our cosy little reunion? I had to be certain I found you, Sheriff. You've changed a lot since I last saw you. I can see age has crept up on you, and you're not quite as fit as you used to be. I've been following you around, Sheriff, in my white Honda. I'm surprised someone as sharp and discerning as you has not noticed me. You see, Sheriff, I don't forget. I'm like a bear with a sore head, I am. While you've been around living the high life, I've been rotting away in a prison cell, missing out on it all. Now that's hardly fair, is it? Do you remember what you said to me that day you arrested me, Sheriff, all those years ago? You said to me that you hoped I rotted in jail, that I should have been locked away for a very long time. For life, you said. Now, Sheriff, your words I did not forget. I never forget. When I was a young boy at my school, no one ever spoke bad to me. If anyone did, they knew they'd be beaten to a pulp. But you, Sheriff, can tell me that I should rot away in prison, and you think you can get away with it? Not on my watch, Sheriff. Never on my watch. I know who you are, Tucker. I remember you clearly. You deserved to go down, I piped. Many kids died because of the contaminated drugs you sold them. You knew those drugs were contaminated, potentially dangerous, very harmful,
But you cared only about filling your deep pockets, did you not? You should have gone down for murder, not just for dealing drugs. You got off lightly, in my opinion. You beat up people who didn't pay you back on time. 2 young boys ended up fighting for their lives in hospital, but were far too frightened. They refused to testify against you. You think you can play God, Sheriff, do you? You think you have a right to judge me because of a few pills that I sold to kids? Because I punched a few people that were disloyal to me? I'm no pushover, Sheriff. Do you remember what I said to you, Sheriff, when I saw you last? I said I'd come back to get you, and here I am as fully promised. You see, Sheriff, I keep my promises. While you have been getting older, I have been getting stronger, doing thousands of push-ups in my cell. Not much else to do, he says, displaying a huge bicep bulging from his string t-shirt, obviously to intimidate me. So what are you going to do? Tucker, beat me to a pulp to get your revenge? Is that it? Oh, Sheriff, please. Beating you to a pulp for costing me several years of my life, locked away in a dingy, suffocating prison. No, Sheriff. I'm going to extract the ultimate form of revenge. I'm going to kill you. You see this plastic bag? I'm going to put it over your head. I'm going to take great pleasure in watching you suffocate to death. And then I'm going to throw you out in the ocean once I've removed the plastic bag from your head. So your pretty little wife will think you drowned after taking a dip. No one swims in these waters, Tucker, without a wetsuit, not even in summer. The water is icy cold here. Well, then, the blustering wind blew you over the rocks, and you drowned. I start to wrestle this man, but I'm no match for him. He grabs my hands and ties them around my back very securely, and then places a plastic bag, a very, very strong plastic bag, over my head. He then lets go of his hold on me, and with my arms tied behind my back, and not being able to see a thing, I'm cocooned in a hazardous nightmare, where I simply cannot breathe. I cannot see, and I can't get this plastic bag off my head. I drop onto the ground, trying to use the sea sand to break through the plastic, and I hear the man laughing at me. You may be locked up in the plastic bag, Sheriff, but I was locked in a prison. Your time will be over soon. I was not so lucky. You're lucky because I could have beaten you to a pulp. This is a good way to go, Sheriff. I'm rubbing the bag like sandpaper, using the sea sand as an exfoliant to break through the plastic. I even tried to bite the bag from the inside with my teeth, but my valiant efforts are unrewarded. The plastic bag is exceedingly tough. I'm suffocating. My lungs are begging for breath. My fingers are trembling, trying so hard to get out of their stranglehold. My heart is pounding. I'm frantic. Time is running out. I know I'm going to die. I hear this roar. Something heavy thunders towards us. I hear Tucker saying, "Bloody hell! What is that?" The next thing I know is the plastic is ripped off my head. I take desperate gasps of air, and Tucker, who has grabbed my revolver, is trying to shoot at something. I notice the obscure, ambiguous figure is huge. Moments ago, Tucker looked huge, but this thing, whatever it is, dwarfs Tucker and makes him look ridiculously puny. Tucker tries to shoot at this thing, but he jumps out of the way, and the bullet misses him. The light of my torch has lit up the scene perfectly. It is enhanced by the faint light of the moon. I'm still taking in deep, desperate breaths. My lungs are trying to catch up with my head. What the hell is going on? Tucker's face is the picture of terror. The creature's back is turned away from me, and he's growling at Tucker fiercely, snatching the revolver from him. The next thing I know, the creature has thrown Tucker over his shoulders. He runs over to the outcrop of rocks, overlooking the deep ocean. I can see him clearly. The creature thumps Tucker on the back of the head and throws him into the ocean. I know he's dead, as he'd not have survived a bash to the head, and even if he did, The icy cold water would surely kill him, especially if he's been knocked unconscious. He will almost certainly drown. I feel no pity for him, no remorse, as he was solely responsible for innocent young teenagers losing their lives thanks to dodgy pills. I realise this creature is a Bigfoot. He glides towards me, standing a few yards away from me. I hear the words in my head. He's gone now. He won't hurt you ever again. Thank you for saving my life, I say. The creature nods at me as if it's no big deal. I can see he's about 8.5 foot tall, 700 pounds, covered in long flowing black hair, with a cone-shaped head slung low on his shoulders. I don't see much evidence of a neck. The creature has a handsome, noble-looking face. The skin was grey and leathery, the cheekbones high, the eyes deep-set and hooded, but a beautiful rich dark colour with a yellow eye shine. The hair silky, smelling like the salt of the sea, not pungent or offensive. If the creature was scary, it was his intimidating size, but that was cancelled out by his gentle, serene nature. This creature had saved my life, and for that I'm truly grateful. Suffice to say, Tucker's body was washed up on another beach. It was presumed he had bumped his head really badly and drowned in the ocean. One officer phoned to tell me that the man I thought should have gone to prison for life had finally been found dead. He was thrilled with the news. I didn't tell him I knew already, nor did I tell my beautiful wife about the Bigfoot. Let's just say some secrets are best not shared, but I feel safer knowing he's out there, and I'm ever thankful for him. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.